15 years ago, on a frigid Christmas night in Minnesota, 3 people left a small lakeside party and vanished without a trace, leaving their families in despair and unspoken pain. Police were mobilized. Dozens of volunteers fanned out across the icy area around Gull Lake, scouring every meter of road, every snowbank, but all they found was silence. A silence as chilling as the freezing lake itself. No tire tracks, no phone signals, no messages. As the third night passed, hope began to melt with the thin ice on the lake's surface, and the small town's residents started whispering that something beneath those waters didn't want to be found. Then years later, when technology and persistence met, a seemingly insignificant detail led police to a truth no one could have imagined. A detail enough to overturn the entire case and shake the peaceful Gull Lake community. Before diving into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love cases like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next video. In the winter of 2009, Brainerd, Minnesota was blanketed in snow and biting cold, with Gull Lake lying still under a thick layer of ice, while pine trees along the forest's edge bowed in the wind. The small town was immersed in Christmas night, with lights from the Wharf Tavern casting a faint glow through the blizzard. 3 friends, Alan Porter, Nora Duncan, and Clay Hammond, left the tavern after the party, giving quick goodbyes to a few acquaintances before stepping into a dark green SUV. They laughed about something before the car door closed, and moments later, the headlights swept through the fog, disappearing down the lakeside road heading north. Inside the tavern, Christmas music still played, and no one noticed that it was the last car to leave the lot that night. The next morning, the town woke to a fresh layer of snow over half a meter thick. Alan's house remained dark, with no smoke rising from the chimney. On the kitchen table sat half a cup of coffee, frozen solid, next to a spare key for the workshop. At Nora's small apartment, the lights were still on, the radio crackling with static, and in the living room, a small Christmas tree glowed with red and green bulbs. Clay didn't show up for work or call his son as promised. When all 3 of their phones rang unanswered, anxiety spread through their families. Everyone thought they might be stuck somewhere due to the blizzard. Maybe a broken-down car or a slide into a roadside ditch. By noon, as the weather briefly calmed, their loved ones split up to search the route from the wharf to Baxter. They stopped at every turn, peered down slippery slopes, and called out names into the white void, but there was nothing but wind and the crunch of snow underfoot. A friend recalled seeing Alan's car leave the lot late, heading toward the lake, and a gas station worker nearby mentioned seeing headlights faintly reflected in the storm before they flickered out, as if swallowed. But all traces vanished within hours. Snowplows had passed through that morning, erasing any clues to their direction. By afternoon, as daylight faded, fear outstripped hope. Alan's sister returned to his house once more. Everything was as it had been that morning. The kitchen cold, a plate of half-eaten food, the clock stopped at last night's time. She called Nora, then Clay, hearing only voicemails. In the silence of the winter afternoon, unease turned to panic. She threw on a coat, drove to downtown Brainerd, and went straight to the Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office. The door opened, warm air mixing with the cold wind. At the front desk, she set down 3 photos and said softly, her voice trembling from cold and fear, "They haven't come home." All 3 of them. Sergeant Daniel Mercer, on duty that morning, set down his pen, labeled the case file missing persons 09421, and called the patrol team covering the Gull Lake area. In a quiet town like Brainerd, 3 people vanishing after the same party was rare and alarming. 2 patrol cars were dispatched along the route the group was believed to have taken from the wharf. The previous night's storm had added nearly half a meter of fresh snow, obliterating any track. At a narrow road leading to an old boat landing, an officer spotted a piece of a car mirror glinting under the weak afternoon light. It was half buried in snow, next to a short skid mark that trailed off and vanished. No brake marks, no turn, just a smooth white expanse as if erased. They set up red reflective stakes around the area, photographed the scene, and sealed the mirror piece in an evidence bag. Back at the station, technicians pulled data from the Ford Explorer's GPS and, OnStar logs provided by the manufacturer. The record showed the vehicle stopped near the boat landing before the signal was manually disabled, not due to an electrical failure or lost connection. Mercer paused for a moment when he read the report. Disabling the system required action from inside the vehicle. He called the manufacturer to confirm the process, then requested an expanded search based on the victim's phone signals after leaving the tavern. That afternoon, in a makeshift meeting room, investigators spread out a map of the area, marking points where GPS data, witness statements, and physical findings aligned. The route from the wharf, the turn onto County Road 77, and the abandoned boat landing formed a short dead-end journey. Mercer wrote 3 possibilities on a board: accident, voluntary disappearance, or third-party interference. After analyzing the evidence and data, he crossed out the first 2. There was no reason for all 3 to vanish, leaving behind belongings and families. That left only the third option. Late that afternoon, the wind died down, and the sky turned a dull gray. A few snowflakes clung to the map, melting into white streaks from the officers' coats. Mercer closed the file and said quietly to his assistant, "We're not looking for 3 lost people anymore. From now on, we're looking for who made them disappear." The investigation officially began. The next morning, Sergeant Mercer and the investigation team returned to the area around Gull Lake. The sky was heavy and gray, snow blanketing the town like a giant sheet. On the road to the old boat landing, the red reflective stakes from the previous day stood silently in the wind, marking where the mirror piece was found. Mercer walked slowly along the snowy path, his boots sinking to his ankles, leaving deep footprints in the white expanse. Beside him, a crime scene technician carried a camera, measuring tape and fresh evidence bags, ready to document every detail. They were beginning the most critical phase, reconstructing the victim's final journey. Before leaving the station, Mercer had requested the tech team compile all footage from traffic cameras around Baxter and Brainerd. Data was pulled from over 20 cameras, including those at the gas station and restaurants near the wharf. It took nearly half the morning to clean up images distorted by the blizzard, and then they found the first notable sequence. The dark green Ford Explorer appeared, leaving the wharf's lot and turning right onto the lakeside road. Its headlights reflected off the icy snow, casting a faint white glow. Seconds later, a silver pickup followed in the same direction, fog lights off and no front license plate. Mercer reviewed the footage multiple times. The resolution was poor, but the pickup's outline was clearly not a familiar local vehicle. Gas stations and stores in the area had cameras facing the main road, but only the one at the County Road 77 intersection captured both vehicles heading north. The next camera over a mile away caught only a faint light in the blizzard, then nothing. Their entire journey ended there, at the boundary between the paved road and the narrow path to the old boat landing. The scene team was ordered back to the landing. Mercer and 2 technicians conducted a detailed sweep of the snow's surface. Beneath the fresh layer, they found a short tire track, less than 10 meters long, faintly etched from the main road toward the lake. The track stopped abruptly, as if the vehicle was forcibly halted or jerked. At its end, the snow was slightly disturbed, no brake marks, no slide toward the lake, just an odd blank space, where the ice was smoothed by wind. Mercer crouched, brushing snow aside with his glove. A faint glint caught the weak sunlight. When the technician lifted it with tweezers, it was a metallic gray-blue paint chip, coin-sized, mixed with anti-icing salt and grit. The technician bagged the sample in nylon, labeled it 03A, and sealed it with BCA reflective tape. Mercer jotted in his notebook, paint fragment, metallic gray-blue, probable vehicle-to-vehicle contact. It could be from the SUV's body, or from another vehicle in a minor collision before disappearing. He ordered the tech team to expand the search 20 meters toward the pine forest, where the snow showed strange compression, as if something heavy had rested there. By noon, the wind picked up, and snow began falling again. Mercer signaled to collect samples and take final panoramic photos. Looking down the small slope to the lake, he noticed something odd. A rusted iron guardrail, near the water's edge, was slightly bent, its paint freshly chipped. On closer inspection, there was a 3-inch scratch, the paint still vivid, glinting silver gray. Mercer nodded slightly, a sign of a collision, possibly from the vehicle trying to turn or being forced to the edge. He had the metal piece cut and sent with the initial paint sample. That afternoon, The team gathered in a small meeting room at the Brainerd police station. Wet snow still clung to the walls from their coats. On the table a map was spread out, marked with red symbols: the wharf, County Road 77 intersection, camera locations and the abandoned boat landing, now officially labeled point of disappearance. The technician presented a preliminary report. The paint chip's alloy structure differed from standard civilian vehicle paint. Its polyurea binder suggested industrial-grade coating resistant to salt, typically used for boats or vehicles in wet environments. A small but significant clue, enough to open a new investigative path. Mercer listened silently, eyes fixed on a printed frame from the gas station camera, the SUV blurred by snow, with the silver pickup's faint shadow behind it. He knew he'd crossed the line from a missing persons case to a criminal investigation. "We find who drove that truck," he said curtly. "And if this paint is what the BCA thinks, that person isn't just driving a pickup, they're working with both." Before ending the day, Mercer wrote a note and taped it to the case file. Request BCA paint analysis, suspected marine-grade coating, source Halverson Marine or related. Outside the window snow kept falling, covering the reflective stakes at the boat landing, leaving only their red tips protruding from the white. In the small room 3 victim photos were pinned to a board, a red string tracing from the wharf to the lakeside road, and ending at the final marker, where the tire tracks stopped abruptly and vanished. 4 days after sending the sample, results from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA lab in St. Paul came back. The report was brief, but the first line caught Sergeant Mercer's attention. Paint sample 03A consistent with marine-grade polyurethane coating, typically used in boat repair and industrial maintenance. The paint sample collected at the marina wasn't the type used on regular cars, but an industrial saltwater-resistant abrasion-resistant coating, mainly used for boats and ship maintenance equipment. In Brainerd only a few places used this material, with Halverson Marine Repair standing out, a boat repair shop located less than 8 miles from the crime scene. Mercer didn't share this with anyone except his deputy. He printed the report, folded it neatly, and drove to Gull Lake, where Halverson's shop was located. It was a low corrugated metal building, with a small frozen marina out back, and an old iron sign out front, that read Halverson Marine, established 1978. The air smelled of oil and metal. When Mercer walked in, a gray-haired sturdy man was wiping his hands, with a gas-soaked rag. Mark Halverson, the shop's owner. He greeted Mercer casually, his voice gruff, his eyes showing no hint of unease. When told the reason for the police visit, "We're looking into 3 people who went missing in Brainerd last week," Mercer began. "Their car was parked at the old marina, near where you work. Know anything about it?" Halverson frowned slightly but stayed calm. "I heard about it. The whole town's talking, but I'm not involved. That night I was home with my wife, watching basketball. You own a silver pickup, right?"
"Yeah."
2005 F-150. Something wrong with it?" Mercer didn't answer right away. He pulled a blurry printout from a gas station camera from his pocket, an image of a green SUV, followed by a silver pickup. "This looks like your truck. Same model, same style, and the headlights are yellowed just like yours." Halverson glanced at the photo for a few seconds, then shrugged slightly. "Not my truck. There are thousands of F-150s in Minnesota. I've never been to that marina since it closed. No reason to go out there in a snowstorm." Mercer nodded, his voice steady. "You said you were home with your wife all night?"
"Yeah."
She can confirm. Halverson's wife, when interviewed later, backed his story. She stated Mark was home all evening, they watched the game, then went to bed before midnight. Nothing seemed suspicious. Still, the lab report left Mercer uneasy. He cross-checked the paint sample from the scene with local supplier data. Only 2 businesses in the area purchased this salt-resistant polyurethane, Halverson Marine and a boat maintenance company in Mille Lacs, over 40 miles from the scene. Meanwhile, a scratch on the marina's iron railing matched the height of a 2005 F-150's front bumper perfectly. Every small detail kept pointing back to one name. 3 days later, a witness unexpectedly contacted the police. Earl Beckett, a security guard at a lakeside resort, said that on the night the victims disappeared, he saw a silver truck parked near Halverson Marine around midnight. Passing by, he noticed a faint blue H logo on the truck's door, and the shop's lights were still on. When asked why he didn't report it earlier, Beckett replied simply, "I thought he was working late. Boats in storage can be fixed anytime." His account matched the time the victim's OnStar signal was cut off. Mercer brought Halverson in for questioning again, this time formally. The interrogation room was small, lit by white fluorescent lights over a metal table. Halverson didn't request a lawyer, remaining calm, even smiling. When Mercer mentioned the witness statement, Halverson exhaled slightly, and said Old Man Beckett's memory isn't great. He sees any truck and thinks it's mine. Mercer didn't respond, just slid a bag containing the paint sample closer. This paint is used to coat boat hulls. It matches what we found at the scene. Halverson looked at the clear plastic bag, his eyes flickering for a second before regaining composure. Nothing unusual, he said slowly. Everyone around here uses that paint. I sell my stock to other shops. The interrogation lasted nearly 2 hours, with no confession or obvious slip-ups in his story. Mercer couldn't hold him longer. As he left, Halverson turned back and said, I get that you're doing your job, but I'm telling you, don't waste your time here. Those three probably had an accident. This winter's been brutal. His voice was even, betraying no emotion. Despite lacking enough evidence to charge him, Mercer remained uneasy. Every piece of the puzzle circled back to Halverson's shop, but something was still missing to tie it all together. He requested a covert surveillance order, asking the task force to monitor the shop's activities, log work hours, client lists, and the routes. Halverson's pickup took. A hidden camera was installed at the marina's entrance, and a GPS tracker was secretly placed on his truck. In an internal memo to his superiors, Mercer wrote briefly, Subject Mark Halverson, paint match confirmed, alibi weak, witness report pending, maintain covert surveillance until further evidence recovered. Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the metal shop by the lake. The shop's lights stayed on late, reflecting off the icy surface where the victim's tire tracks had vanished. 4 months after the three disappeared, spring finally arrived in central Minnesota. Snow melted slowly, and large sheets of ice on Gull Lake broke apart, drifting lazily in the murky gray water. The season's earliest fishermen, 2 old men named Carl Jensen and Tom Riley, rowed out to try their luck. They used a handheld sonar to gauge depth and find fish schools, a tool veteran anglers often used. But instead of fish, the device picked up a large metallic signal, its echo sharp and distinct, unlike anything they'd heard in that area. At first they thought it was industrial debris, or an old boat wreck, as the area had been a marina in the 70s. But when Jensen moved the boat, the signal stayed fixed, over 20 feet deep, near the abandoned marina's main dock, the exact spot police had marked as the disappearance point. He called the local rescue agency, saying something big, metallic is under the ice. The report reached the Crow Wing Sheriff's Office, and Sergeant Mercer was on the scene immediately. The rescue team of 6 brought a salvage boat and specialized sonar equipment. The air was freezing, with wind carrying mist off the lake, and the ice broke into patchy slabs. Mercer stood on the shore, watching through binoculars as the rescue boat moved to the marked spot. After 15 minutes of scanning, the sonar screen showed a large metallic object, roughly the size of a Ford Explorer SUV. A diver went down to check, and minutes later his voice crackled over the radio, mixed with wind. It's a vehicle, side windows broken. There are people inside. That brief message left the team nearly breathless. An immediate lockdown order was issued, and the forensic team and crime scene unit were called in. The salvage operation stretched through the afternoon. Cables were secured around the chassis, and a winch slowly pulled the vehicle from the frigid water. As the front emerged, thin mud and algae slid off the broken windows, the smell of rusted metal mixing with stagnant lake water. The rear license plate came into view, matching Alan Porter's missing vehicle report. The dark green Explorer was placed on a large plastic tarp, water dripping in long streaks. The right side door was smashed, its glass shattered inside the cab. The driver's seat was fully reclined, the gear shift in park, and the handbrake engaged. This immediately ruled out the vehicle rolling into the lake on its own. Inside, police found 2 bodies, a man in the driver's seat and a woman slumped in the passenger seat. A third body, another man, was found a few meters away, tangled in underwater tree roots, with part of a seatbelt wrapped around his leg. The forensic team meticulously collected samples, documenting every detail. A white zip tie lay across the floor, one end cut. On the dashboard, gray duct tape held a patch of hair and human skin. In the trunk, a small flashlight, now dead, had leaked battery acid. There were no signs of airbag deployment or significant frame damage. Mercer stood by the lake's edge, observing the scene. The vehicle hadn't crashed into the lake at high speed. It was placed there deliberately. Someone pushed it, he said quietly, almost to himself. Police set up a tent at the marina, yellow lights reflecting off the gray water. Technicians collected lakebed mud, fresh paint chips from the front bumper, and salt sand samples stuck to the tires. In Mercer's notebook, entries grew dense. Handbrake engaged. Intentional placement. Zip tie and duct tape present. Probable restraint. Windshield intact. No frontal crash. Everything pointed to one conclusion. This was no accident. As the vehicle was towed to the sheriff's impound lot, Mercer followed, standing on the shore, watching the dark, dripping SUV. He knew this was a turning point in the case, the first real evidence after months. That evening, local news ran a brief report. Police recover vehicle linked to 3 missing people at Gull Lake. Details not yet released. Mercer stayed silent, withholding information about the bodies or evidence, telling his internal team only that this is just the beginning. At the Crow Wing County morgue, the 3 bodies were moved to cold storage. Forensic staff worked through the night, peeling off wet clothing, photographing conditions, and collecting tissue samples. All 3 were identified as Alan Porter, Nora Duncan, and Clay Hammond, the group that left the wharf bar that snowy night. In the report, Mercer added a line he'd always remember. Vehicle retrieved intact, occupants restrained prior to submersion. Homicide presumed. The next day, facing the press, Mercer's face was stone cold as he spoke briefly. We've recovered the vehicle and the missing persons. Based on scene evidence, this was not a traffic accident. All signs point to human intervention. Behind him, Gull Lake lay silent, swallowing all sound, its rippling surface reflecting a pale gray sky. In the damp, cold air, the case officially shifted to a new phase, from missing persons to murder. The next morning, the 3 bodies were transferred to the Ramsey County Medical Examiner's office in St. Paul, where Dr. Elaine Moore's team took over. On cold stainless steel tables, the waterlogged body bags were carefully placed. Outside, the smell of disinfectant mixed with metallic chill, the air heavy. This was the first step in a series of analyses Mercer hoped would provide definitive answers about what happened on Gull Lake. Dr. Moore opened the first bag. Alan Porter, male, 36, found in the driver's seat. His clothes were intact, belt buckled, shoes on. When his right wrist was turned, she found deep circular indentations, marks from plastic restraints, with small scratches where the tie was cut. His chest and neck showed petechial hemorrhages, classic signs of asphyxiation by compression. There was no significant lake water in his lungs, meaning he died before the vehicle submerged. The second victim, Nora Duncan, 29, had large bruises on her neck and chest. A white zip tie partially cut clung to her left wrist, its end stuck with gray adhesive. Under her fingernails were skin cells from another person. Samples were sealed immediately. When her arm was cleaned, parallel scratches ran down her bicep, as if she'd struggled to break free. The third victim, Clay Hammond, 33, was found outside the vehicle. His wrists were bruised, elbows scraped and fingernails broken, indicating fierce resistance. Blood vessels in his neck showed hemorrhaging from oxygen deprivation. Like the others, his lungs held no water, confirming all 3 died before being submerged. As Dr. Moore conducted the autopsies, BCA forensic technicians processed the Ford Explorer. Fabric scraps, plastic ties, and duct tape were placed on stainless steel trays. A technician used a magnifying glass to examine the tape's edge from the dashboard, finding a short brown hair and dried skin cells. These were sealed in a bag labeled Evidence 12B and sent to the biology unit for DNA analysis. In the trunk, among lake mud and sand, they found tiny gray-green paint particles clinging to the hinges. Under an electron microscope, the paint revealed 3 layers: zinc primer, polyurethane coating, and anti-salt top coat, matching the structure of paint used in boat repair. Trace analysis confirmed compounds of titanium dioxide and ethyl silicate, identical to the formula used by Halverson Marine Repair. When Mercer received the lab's summary report, he sat in silence for a long time. The fax's final line read, "Paint trace consistent with sample from Halverson Marine Supply lot." The pieces were falling into place. The paint from the shore, trace particles in the trunk, and the presence of duct tape and zip ties, all linked to one source: Halverson and his shop. That afternoon, Dr. Moore called Mercer to present the autopsy findings in person. In a small meeting room, she laid 3 photo files before him. All 3 died of mechanical asphyxiation before submersion, she said, her voice steady and cold. No signs of impact, no head trauma, no gunshot wounds. They were restrained, possibly by hand or a soft object around the neck. Mercer asked, any chance they did this to themselves? Impossible. The wrist restraints were behind their backs. They couldn't tie themselves. Nora's scratches show she was conscious when bound. Someone had complete control before the vehicle went into the lake. At the same time, preliminary DNA results came back from the biology unit. Male DNA, not matching any victim. The sample was clear enough to create a distinct profile, and was entered into the National TOTUS database for comparison. No immediate matches were found, but the profile was saved as unknown male profile. Mercer noted beside it, potential suspect DNA recovered from duct tape on passenger side. Late that night, the Brainerd police station stayed lit. Mercer and investigators held an urgent meeting. On a whiteboard, he drew a new diagram. 3 victims. Zip ties, duct tape, gray-green paint, Halverson Marine. Under each item was a brief note: restrained before death, paint match, possible homicide site near water. Every arrow pointed the same way. This isn't an accident, Mercer said, his voice low. They were killed, and the vehicle was sunk to stage the scene. A young investigator asked, do we have enough to charge Halverson? Mercer shook his head. Not yet. The DNA hasn't matched, but I want to know why paint from his shop was in the victim's trunk. He ordered a collection of chemical lists, suppliers, and paint shipments Halverson received in December. Meanwhile, the forensic team tested mud on the tires. Results showed sand with tiny glass beads common in marina areas, not paved roads. The vehicle hadn't left the lake area after breaking down. It was handled right there. Late that evening, Mercer stood before a bulletin board with photos of the 3 victims. Fluorescent light reflected off the glass covering the crime scene map. He knew the case had shifted from a vague accident theory to a deliberate murder, with physical evidence pointing directly to a familiar name. On the desk's corner, the forensic report was clipped shut, its final page bearing Dr. Moore's brief note in red ink. All evidence indicates homicidal asphyxia prior to submersion. Manner of death: homicide. Mercer closed the file. One thought echoed in his mind: Mark Halverson was back at the top of the suspect list. 3 days after the forensic report was completed, Sergeant Mercer summoned Mark Halverson to the Crow Wing police station. The summons was delivered in the morning, and just 2 hours later, Halverson arrived, voluntarily, showing no signs of evasion. He wore a thick canvas jacket, his hands still stained with splotches of grayish-green paint, his deep inscrutable eyes paired with a faint, defiant smile. As he entered the interrogation room, he glanced around and said in a calm tone, "I'm guessing this is about that car in the lake again." The interrogation room was small, lit by cold white light, furnished only with a steel table and 2 chairs. Mercer sat across from him, placing a recorder on the table. "We just want to clarify a few details," he said. "This isn't a formal interrogation. You're not under arrest." Halverson nodded, crossing his arms. "I'm ready to cooperate. I've got nothing to hide." Mercer opened a file, flipping to photos of trace paint samples, duct tape and zip ties collected from the scene. He said nothing for a few seconds, letting Halverson's gaze linger on each image. "This paint sample," Mercer said slowly, "matches exactly the type used at Halverson Marine. We also have a witness who saw your vehicle near the lake that night." Halverson leaned back in his chair, giving a faint smile. "I told you I was home. It was a big storm that night. Who'd go out to the lake?" "My wife can confirm." "She did confirm," Mercer replied evenly. "But the basketball game you said you watched with her was on the next day. Are you sure you didn't mix things up?" Halverson went quiet. The smile lingered, but his eyes flickered slightly. "Maybe I got it wrong. I don't keep a daily journal." Mercer turned on a screen behind him. Grainy footage from a gas station camera appeared. The victim's dark green SUV, followed closely by a silver pickup. "This is your truck, isn't it?" Halverson tilted his head, studying the image. "Plenty of people have silver trucks. No license plate, no proof. I don't see myself in there." We enhanced the image. The left fog light on this truck is tilted down 15 degrees, Exactly like yours. I have a photo of your truck from last month. The lights misaligned the same way. Mercer slid the two images side by side. Halverson glanced at them briefly and said softly, "Just a coincidence." The interrogation lasted over an hour. Mercer repeatedly pressed Halverson about his whereabouts on the night of December 18, when he left the shop, when he got home, whether he made any calls or texts. Halverson stuck to the same story, that he left the shop before 8, went home, ate dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. But when Mercer asked for phone records to verify call locations, Halverson hesitated briefly. "I use a prepaid phone," he said. "No location data." The response was noted in the record, marked as non-verifiable alibi. Mercer shifted to the shop's operations, asking Halverson about the paint used for boat coatings and recent supply shipments. Halverson was knowledgeable, listing details of each material, even naming a supplier in Minneapolis. But when Mercer presented a delivery log, showing a paint batch matching the crime scene sample, Halverson's expression froze. "That batch arrived on December 17, right?" Mercer asked. "The next night, we found paint with the same formula in the victim's trunk. I want to know why." Halverson looked at his hands, then back up. "I can't control where my customers take my products," he said, his voice firmer. "You're trying to set me up, Mercer." "No," Mercer said quietly. "I'm trying to figure out what you did to." After the interrogation, Halverson maintained a cooperative facade. He signed the report, didn't object to a DNA sample, and even said, "If it helps prove I'm innocent, I'm fine with it." But as he left the room, he turned back, locking eyes with Mercer. "I'd suggest looking elsewhere. That lake's swallowed more than you think." That night, Mercer sat alone in the meeting room, reviewing the notes. Halverson's statement had small but consistent inconsistencies. The time he left the shop, when he turned off the lights, and the paint purchase timeline. He cross-checked Halverson's wife's statement. She said they watched basketball on Saturday night, while the disappearance was on a Friday. Those minor details, combined with the pickup appearing on camera, convinced Mercer that Halverson wasn't home as claimed. However, legally there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. No direct witnesses, no matching DNA, and though the paint was compelling, it was only circumstantial. Mercer sent a case summary to the county prosecutor, requesting the file remain open, under surveillance, and planned to monitor Halverson's finances and movements. A covert tracker was installed on his vehicle, and his bank accounts were watched for unusual transactions. Before leaving the station, Mercer jotted a private note in his notebook. "Halverson maintains a fake calm, eyes shifted when paint was mentioned. Can't charge, but can't rule out. Keep watching, he knows more than he's saying." Outside the window, the night wind swept through the icy parking lot, reflecting the glow of patrol car lights. In the dim light, the Gull Lake case file remained open on the table, its final page marked with a brief note: "Primary suspect, Mark Halverson. Continue covert surveillance." The Gull Lake case faded into the shadows after its initial flurry of activity. No arrests, no new evidence. Every effort by Sergeant Mercer and the investigation team hit a wall. The DNA sample from the duct tape, the most critical clue, was entered into CODIS, but matched no profile. The national database was limited then. If the source had no prior convictions, the system couldn't identify them. Mercer called it a ghost's fingerprint. By mid-2011, the case was officially classified as a cold case, with only 2 investigators assigned to periodic update. Halverson remained a suspect, but all surveillance efforts proved fruitless. He rarely left town, lived quietly, and mostly stayed at his shop. Further police interviews yielded nothing. His wife stuck to her original statement, and witness Earl Beckett had moved out of Minnesota. Mercer had to accept what he hated most: an unsolved case. At the BCA evidence storage in St. Paul, the case file coded 09421, Gull Lake homicide, was sealed with red tape and stored in a cold vault, alongside hundreds of other unresolved cases. Inside were plastic bags, containing zip ties, paint fragments, duct tape, and lakebed soil. On the box, the label "Pending DNA Match" served as a reminder that the investigation was only dormant, never truly closed. Mercer didn't give up. Each year he requested retesting of the evidence, hoping new technology might yield clues, but the results were always the same: no new matches. By 2014, he was reassigned to the training division, and the Gull Lake case was handed to the BCA's newly formed cold case unit. In his handover report, he wrote a final note: "Suspect Mark Halverson remains under low-profile surveillance. Recommend retest DNA every 24 months, or upon new technology update." From then, the case seemed buried under dust in the archive. Media coverage stopped, and townsfolk no longer mentioned the 3 victims, save for occasional small articles on the anniversary of their disappearance. Halverson continued working at his boat shop, seemingly blending into normal life. But for those who worked the case, that normalcy always reeked of deceit. In 2015, the BCA reviewed all cold cases to prioritize them. Among dozens of unresolved cases, Gull Lake was flagged as potentially viable for reinvestigation with technological advances. A young investigator, Rebecca Muir, recently transferred from forensics, was tasked with reviewing the file. In the frigid archive room, she opened the evidence box, pulling out plastic bags labeled in Mercer's shaky but clear handwriting from 2010. Zip tie wrist restraint, duct tape, unknown DNA, paint, marine coating. Rebecca spent 2 days reading, noting every detail. She was struck by Mercer's meticulousness: hand-drawn diagrams, timelines, and concise but evocative comment. One, underlined in red, stood out: "If we can't find the killer, we must find why they were killed." That sentence lingered with her. She considered an angle most prior investigators overlooked: motive. The 3 victims had no conflicts, debts, or business ties in the Niswa area. But Alan, the driver, had repaired a boat engine for an unknown client at Halverson's shop before disappearing. That service record, noted in the shop's ledger, was a minor detail never fully explored. Rebecca documented this in her 2016 review report, sent to the cold case team leader, requesting re-examination of the paint and zip tie evidence using next-generation spectrometry, which could analyze compounds at a molecular level. Budget constraints delayed the request, and the case went back to sleep. That same year, Mercer, now retired, occasionally visited the old station. He asked about Gull Lake, flipped through update logs, and gave a sad smile. "That lake hasn't answered yet," he told Rebecca during one meeting, "but it will when someone listens at the right frequency." His words stuck with her. By 2017, as the BCA began digitizing cold case files, Rebecca uploaded all Gull Lake data to the new system. She scanned crime scene photos, evidence, and forensic reports, preparing for potential use of next-generation sequencing, NGS, in the future. In her introductory note, she added, "No viable lead as of 2017. DNA sample stored, recommended for future genealogical analysis." The case officially entered a 7-year hibernation. No perpetrator, no confession, no new clues, just cold plastic bags and memories of a winter when 3 people were submerged in a lake. But thanks to Rebecca, the file wasn't entirely forgotten. It remained on the BCA's priority list. And on the final page, below her digital signature, Mercer's quote was preserved verbatim: "If we can't find the killer, we must find why they were killed." This new technology allowed tracing genetic lineage through commercial DNA databases, something deemed impossible for criminal investigations just years prior. Among hundreds of cold cases selected for testing, File 09421, Gull Lake Homicide, was among the first. Investigator Rebecca Muir, who reviewed the case in 2016, was assigned to lead the new analysis phase. She visited the BCA's cold storage, where the evidence box still sat, labeled in handwriting, "Unknown male DNA duct tape sample." The DNA taken from tape on the Explorer's dashboard was thawed for the first time in 8 years. Under the lab's fluorescent lights, Rebecca carefully cut a cell sample and placed it in a vial. "This time," she whispered, "give me a name." The BCA partnered with Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia to process the sample. Using next-generation sequencing, they reconstructed a near-complete genome of the unknown man. The data was then uploaded to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where millions of Americans had submitted DNA to find distant relatives. It took nearly 6 weeks for the algorithm to complete its comparison. One April morning, an email from Parabon arrived with a simple subject: "Match found, probability not." The results showed the DNA on the tape was closely linked to 2 families in north-central Minnesota, Halverson and Lundgren. In the estimated family tree, the DNA bearer was a direct descendant of the Halverson line, likely a son or nephew of the main branch. Rebecca sat in silence, heart pounding. After 8 years, the name Halverson was back at the case's center. She printed the results and brought them to the chief examiner. They reviewed each probability metric. The genetic correlation hit 99.8%, with a reference DNA sample from a 2004 civilian test, registered under Mark Edward Halverson. There was no chance of random coincidence. The DNA on the tape belonged to the man once considered a suspect, but who had slipped through the investigation. The BCA immediately prepared a summons to collect a direct confirmation sample from Halverson. Rebecca and the Crow Wing investigation team planned to request a voluntary sample to avoid tipping him off. But before the order was officially signed, an unexpected event occurred. In the early hours of April 27, 2018, Halverson Marine Repair erupted in flame. The fire was spotted just after 3 a.m. by a security guard at the Nisway Industrial Park. By the time firefighters arrived, the entire shop, warehouse, small office and auxiliary dock was engulfed. No one was injured, but all contents were destroyed. The preliminary report cited electrical short from an old circuit breaker, but Mercer, retired but informed, didn't believe it was an accident. Upon hearing the news, Rebecca drove to the scene. She stood amid the ashes, with smoldering smoke still rising, the acrid smell of burnt metal lingering. The iron frame was warped, the Halverson Marine sign reduced to half its letters. Firefighters found a charred metal object in the office corner, a computer hard drive, its aluminum casing deformed, power cord singed. Rebecca ordered it sealed immediately. She knew fires like this rarely happened by chance. Just before a suspect was to be summoned, the hard drive was sent to the BCA's digital forensics lab, but heat damage rendered it unreadable. The IT team suggested sending it to the FBI in Minneapolis, which had specialized recovery equipment. Rebecca signed the transfer order that day, noting, potential evidence may contain financial records, correspondence, or imagery related to case. While awaiting FBI results, the BCA finalized legal steps for the DNA finding. The state prosecutor requested a second confirmation with a direct sample. However, Halverson was briefly hospitalized for minor burns. He claimed he fell while trying to extinguish the fire. His lawyer blocked police from taking a blood sample, citing medical privacy. Rebecca had no choice but to wait. Internally, the BCA viewed the fire as highly suspicious. The shop area was sealed off, ash samples collected, and tests run for accelerant. Preliminary results showed traces of diesel mixed with gasoline solvent on the floor, inconsistent with an electrical cause. Mercer, upon receiving the report, said to Rebecca over the phone, "He's cleaning up his past." 3 weeks later, the FBI in Minneapolis reported recovering about 60% of the hard drive's data. Beyond accounting files and client lists, they found a hidden encrypted folder, labeled. When decrypted, it revealed photos of the Gull Lake dock in winter, the exact area where the victims disappeared. The images' metadata showed they were taken on December 18. Rebecca printed the photos and spread them on the table. In one, headlights reflected off the ice, with a faint green SUV in the distant darkness. Another showed a silver pickup parked near the water's edge. Though blurry and shot from a low angle, likely from another vehicle's cabin, it was enough for her. Halverson was there. She wrote in her report to superiors, genetic genealogy confirmed familial match to Mark Halverson, 99.8%. Subsequent fire at subject's property, likely intentional. Digital evidence retrieved, time-stamped images from Gull Lake, dated Dec 18, 2009. The day's final log noted, investigation escalated to criminal homicide review. Suspect, Mark Edward Halverson. After 8 years of dormancy, the Gull Lake case was revived, sparked by a forgotten DNA strand on a small piece of tape, and sealed by the smoldering ashes of a boat shop. 2 weeks after the FBI's Minneapolis office announced they had recovered most of the data, Rebecca Muir was invited to review the initial findings. The FBI's digital forensics lab was located in the basement of their headquarters, cold blue light reflecting off rows of monitors. The lead technician, Agent Kyle Donovan, greeted her with a lukewarm coffee and a simple opener, "You should brace yourself. We've seen something strange." On the screen, Donovan opened a folder, labeled, "Recovered." Dozens of image and video files appeared, many corrupted but clear enough to discern content. The first photos showed the Gull Lake marina, thick with snow, under a pitch-black sky. Yellow light from a car's cabin reflected off the ice, creating a faint halo. In the corner of the frame, Barely visible was the silhouette of a dark green Ford Explorer SUV, the exact model of the victim's vehicle. Donovan zoomed in. Pixel noise gradually sharpened. At the bottom edge of the image, in the reflection of the car's window, a man's figure leaned close to the camera. The proportions of his shoulders, neck and head shape matched almost perfectly with Mark Halverson's 2009 profile photo. Rebecca sat silently. The photo was taken with a Nikon D40 digital camera, its metadata timestamp December 18, 2009, at 22:47, the exact night the three victims disappeared. The GPS coordinates embedded in the image matched the old marina area, where police had found a mirror fragment and tire tracks. The exposure time was 1/22nd, aperture f/4, indicating the photographer had stopped the car, opened the door, and shot from very close to the ice. Donovan moved the cursor to the next image, the interior of a vehicle, yellowed light illuminating wet leather seat. On the dashboard, a strip of gray duct tape was stuck, exactly where police had once found male DNA. "You're telling me these files were taken on the night of December 18? Rebecca asked, her voice hoarse. "Exactly," Donovan replied. "Not just photos, there's video too." He opened a file, labeled, Vidi 2009-12. Then abruptly, a man's hoarse, tired voice came through the camera's mic. "Hold it steady, hurry up." This was followed by a thud, heavy breathing, and finally a stifled scream. A woman's voice trembling, pleading for something unintelligible. The video lasted 18 seconds, but left the room dead silent. Donovan paused the playback and said quietly, "This file was in a hidden folder, basic level encryption. Someone tried to delete it, but not thoroughly. The file structure shows it was recorded with the same Nikon camera as the photos." Rebecca stayed quiet for a few seconds, then asked, "That audio, can you isolate the voice?" "We're working on it. Low frequency, but we can identify gender and age range." The male voice matches a middle-aged profile, around 40-55 years old. She nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. The final image in the folder showed a dim scene, seemingly cracked ice, light from the car reflecting in patches, and a dark void where water began to rise. The timestamp 22:58, just 10 minutes after the first photo. She realized this was the moment the OnStar signal cut off in the 2009 raw data. Donovan flipped to another page in the technical report. "One more thing, we found a system log from the computer, last backed up at 2 on April 27, 2018, exactly 40 minutes before the fire. He accessed the machine," Rebecca said softly, "probably to delete these files." "Exactly, but he didn't finish." That afternoon, Rebecca held an urgent meeting with the Crow Wing County Prosecutor's Office. The FBI's digital evidence was deemed a breakthrough. Photos, video, audio, and metadata all directly tied Halverson to the night of the crime. However, to formalize it legally, an additional search warrant was needed to look for related physical evidence at the burned workshop site. She submitted the case file to the district judge, attaching the extracted images and FBI report. The request clearly stated, potential evidence remaining at site, physical residue, devices, tools possibly connected to homicide. The warrant was signed that night. The next morning, the investigation team returned to the ashen remains of Halverson Marine Repair. They dug deep into the collapsed office foundation, searching for traces of wiring, storage devices, or anything that survived the fire. In the north corner of the wall they found the charred metal frame of a digital camera, its serial number still legible, a Nikon D40, the same model noted in the photo metadata. Rebecca watched as the technician held the blackened object. Amid the smell of smoke and wet mud, she felt the final pieces falling into place. DNA, paint, photos, the voice, and now the camera. All pointed to one man, Mark Halverson. That evening, in her report to the BCA director, she wrote, "Recovered digital evidence, photographic and video data captured Dec 18. Metadata consistent with time of victim's disappearance. Voice analysis pending, probable match to suspect Mark Halverson, requesting continuation of search warrant to include property excavation and related equipment retrieval." Below her signature she added a short line much like Mercer had written years earlier. "If the lake won't speak, the data will." On the morning of June 3, 2018, as the sun rose over the pines surrounding Nisswa Lake, the BCA investigation team, alongside Crow Wing County Police, executed an expanded search warrant at Halverson Marine Repair. The warrant was signed just 12 hours after Rebecca Muir submitted her report on the recovered hard drive data and photo metadata. If their suspicions were correct, this place wasn't just a boat repair shop, it was the staging ground for a murder. The workshop remained gray and blackened from the fire. Warped steel beams and torn tin roofing hung precariously. The acrid smell of burnt metal and plastic lingered heavily in the air. The forensic team, dressed in white hazmat suits, moved carefully through the ash. Rebecca stood by the entrance, behind the yellow caution tape, noting the start time, 08:14 a.m. They began with the storage area at the back, the least damaged section from the fire. A tilted metal crate held old tools, pliers, wrenches, screwdrivers, and a multi-tool knife. Among them, a yellow Stanley utility knife with a rusted blade caught the field technician's attention. Under UV light, a dark brown stain appeared on the blade, signs of old dried blood not fully destroyed by heat. Rebecca ordered it sealed immediately, labeled item SIN 44A, and sent for DNA testing. Under the knife's handle, they also found dried gray-blue paint, matching the paint sample from the explorer's trunk. Next to the tool crate was a charred cardboard box containing several rolls of gray silver seal duct tape. Each roll bore a batch label, batch number 19. Rebecca recognized the number instantly. It matched the batch of duct tape found in the victim's car, noted in the BCA's. Finding the same batch at the workshop was direct physical evidence, linking Halverson to the crime scene. "We need to take this whole box," she said, her voice tense but firm. As the team moved to the office area, they scanned the partially collapsed concrete foundation. Beneath the ash, they found fragments of burnt fabric, dark gray microfiber. The fibers were collected with specialized tweezers and examined under a portable microscope. The 3D weave structure matched the upholstery of the 2006 Ford Explorer seats, where the two bodies were found. The technician noted, microfiber transfer, direct contact, between suspect and vehicle interior. Scanning the remaining foundation, a 3D scanner detected two overlapping sets of footprints in the ash, one size 10, matching Halverson's shoe size, the other size 12, longer and wider. Rebecca paused as she reviewed the scanned images. "Someone else was here with him," she said quietly. The technician marked the location, photographed it, and collected ash samples from the tread marks to test for rubber compounds. The search continued until nearly noon. As the sun climbed, the smell of smoke, mixed with the damp odor of ash, grew stifling. Evidence bags began lining up on a portable table. The Stanley knife, matching batch duct tape, microfiber fragments, paint flakes, blood samples and shoe print. Rebecca inspected each bag, signing off on the chain of custody. Sweat and ash blackened her gloves, but her voice remained steady as she read the list over the radio to headquarters. Recovered items include one Stanley utility knife with suspected blood trace, duct tape, batch 1982, LX, multiple rolls, microfiber textile fragment matching Ford Explorer interior, blue-gray marine paint flake, secondary footwear impression, size 12. By late morning they moved to the marina dock behind the workshop, where a half-collapsed wooden pier remained. A volunteer diver searched the shallow water beneath, finding two white plastic zip ties, 6 inches long, the same type found in the victim's car. One end still had silver duct tape wrapped around it, as if it had been tightened and cut with a sharp blade. This was deemed the day's most critical evidence. That afternoon, back at headquarters, Rebecca and the forensics team immediately processed the DNA from the knife. Preliminary results appeared on the screen hours later. The blood trace under the blade matched the DNA profile of Alan Porter, the male victim who drove the car. The interim report noted, confirmed blood transfer between weapon and victim. There was no doubt, Halverson had direct contact with the victim, undeniable. Rebecca held the results, her hands trembling. She recalled the recovered video from the hard drive, the hoarse male voice commanding, "Hold it steady." Now the blood on the knife told the rest of the story. She wrote a concise report to the county prosecutor. Physical evidence confirms suspect Halverson's direct involvement. Secondary shoe print suggests additional individual at scene. Recommend expansion of investigation to potential accomplice. As night fell, Rebecca's office light remained on. On her desk lay the crime scene photo, next to the sealed Stanley knife in its nylon bag. Outside the window, spring rain began to fall, washing away the ash lingering around the workshop. In the foggy glass, her reflection merged with the old FBI photo of Halverson, standing at the marina For the first time in nearly 9 years, Rebecca was certain this was no longer just Halverson's crime. Someone else had been there with him that night. The explorer vanished under Gull Lake's ice, and the investigation was now entering its most dangerous phase. 3 days after the DNA from the blood on the Stanley knife was confirmed, the BCA forensics lab completed analysis of the second shoe print and a hair sample found at the Halverson Marine Workshop Foundation. The results stunned Rebecca Muir for a moment as she read partial DNA match identified Rick Myers, male 52, former deputy of Crow Wing County Sheriff's Department. Myers' name had appeared in the 2010 case file, not as a suspect, but as the officer leading the initial search team when the 3 victims went missing. Rebecca reviewed the old records. In the list of personnel deployed to search the Gull Lake area, Deputy Myers was assigned to oversee the eastern route, where the old marina was located. He reported having checked the entire area, no traces found. But now, his shoe print and hair were found in the ash of Halverson's workshop. Rebecca immediately submitted a report to the lead investigator, requesting an internal review. In the report, she wrote clearly, potential collusion between suspect Halverson and former deputy involved in original search effort. Minnesota State Police were brought in to avoid conflicts of interest, as Myers had served over a decade in Crow Wing. The state investigation team started with financial records. What they uncovered confirmed a deeper connection between the two seemingly unrelated men. Through bank account analysis, they found an $18,000 transfer from Halverson Marine to Rick Myers' personal account, made on December 20. On paper, the money was listed as purchase of old patrol equipment, but no invoice or transfer record existed. When cross-checked with Sheriff's Department records, the mentioned patrol vehicle was still in storage, never sold. Rebecca recalled the early days of the investigation. Myers had been adamant that nothing suspicious was at the marina, arguing the car could have been swept under the ice in an accident. He also pushed to end the search after 7 days, citing harsh weather conditions, not feasible. At the time, Mercer had objected but lacked the authority to overrule. Looking back, those decisions now seemed designed to conceal the true crime scene. When state police arrived at Myers' home in suburban Pequot Lakes, they found him alert, almost as if he'd been expecting them. With graying hair and a large build, he greeted them calmly. "I knew this was coming." He didn't resist, only asked, "Did you find something at Halverson's workshop?" Without waiting for an answer, he invited them into his living room. The initial questioning was conducted on site, fully recorded. When asked about his relationship with Halverson, Myers claimed they were just fishing buddies, occasionally helping each other move boat equipment. But when investigators presented a copy of the $18,000 transaction, his demeanor shifted. "That was a personal loan repayment," he said quickly. "I borrowed money from him to fix my house. Then why no loan contract? Why no repayments in nearly a decade?" The investigator pressed. Myers fell silent, his gaze drifting to the window where light rain fell over the pines. When questioned about the night of the 2009 disappearance, Myers said he was on duty at the station, but shift logs confirmed another officer had signed in for him at the exact time the victim's SUV left the wharf bar. This small lie, combined with the physical evidence from the workshop, was enough for the BCA to request a temporary arrest warrant. Meanwhile, the forensics team continued analyzing the rubber residue in the second shoe print. The results matched perfectly with Red Wing 404 soles, the standard patrol boots used by Crow Wing County Police at the time. A pair of the same model was listed in Myers' 2000. The hair found in the fire ash, analyzed for mitochondrial DNA, also confirmed a maternal genetic match with Myers, verifying his presence at the workshop during the time of the fire. When Myers was escorted to BCA headquarters for formal questioning, he remained silent for nearly an hour. His court-appointed lawyer sat beside him, occasionally signaling to pause questions. The atmosphere shifted only when Rebecca entered the room. She had personally overseen the workshop search. She placed 3 clear evidence bags on the table, one with the gray-blue paint flake, one with the matching batch duct tape, and finally, the Stanley knife with blood residue. "All of these came from Halverson Marine," she said slowly. "But your shoe print and hair were there." Myers stared at the plastic bags, then looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I didn't kill anyone," he said. "I just helped clean up." Rebecca pressed, Helped who? He stayed silent. She leaned in. Halverson. Myers gave a slight nod. He said it was an accident, that they were already dead, that if I didn't help I'd lose my job. I was stupid enough to believe him. That partial confession was recorded, sufficient for state police to forward the case to federal prosecute. The case was no longer just murder, it was conspiracy and organized crime cover-up, involving a former law enforcement officer. At the end of the day, Rebecca left headquarters, looking out at the rain-soaked lot where Halverson's car had once parked years ago. In her mind echoed a line from Mercer's old report: a killer may be good at hiding tracks, but they always have an accomplice, even if that accomplice is just someone who stays silent. Now Rick Myers' silence had broken, and with it the Gull Lake case finally moved toward the close of nearly a decade-long investigation. 2 identical rooms, separated only by a frosted glass partition, each equipped with a tape recorder and a ceiling-mounted camera. On one side was Mark Halverson, the boat repairman who had denied everything for nearly a decade. On the other was Rick Myers, a former deputy sheriff who had been part of the initial search. Neither knew they were being interrogated simultaneously, their every answer projected live onto a small screen in the other room. Rebecca Muir and senior investigator David Kramer handled the double interrogation. Rebecca took Halverson, while Kramer questioned Myers. Both were informed of their right to remain silent, but neither chose to. Perhaps they believed they could still save themselves. Halverson sat upright, hands clasped, his face unnervingly calm. The cold white fluorescent light reflected in his pale gray eyes. Rebecca began. We have enough physical evidence. DNA, paint, duct tape and video. Care to explain before I read the charges? He chuckled softly. I didn't kill anyone. It was an accident. An accident? Rebecca echoed. Alan came to the shop that night, drunk, demanding I pay for boat repairs. I said I didn't have the money. He got mad. Slapped me. I fought back. He fell, hit his head on the table's edge. I thought he was dead. I panicked, called Rick. Rebecca stared, unblinking. And Myers helped you hide the body? Yeah. He told me to shut up. He'd handle it. He said if the cops found out, we'd both be done. He tied the other 2 to the car, pushed it into the lake. Rebecca paused for a moment, then asked, You're saying Myers pushed the car, not you? Halverson nodded. I just watched. He's the one who did it. In the other room, Myers slouched in his chair, his face haggard from a sleepless night. Investigator Kramer set a file on the table, his voice steady. Halverson says you went to the shop on December 18th, helped him clean up. Care to respond? Myers gave a faint, trembling smile. Clean up? He's crazy. He called me after it was all over. What do you mean? He told me 3 people were dead in the shop. I thought he was joking, but when I got there, I saw blood. He was freaking out, said they attacked him, and he messed up. He begged me to help move the car to the lake, afraid people would suspect him. Kramer slowly revealed a photo. A Stanley knife, stained with blood, confirmed to be Alan Porter's. We found this in his shop, with the victim's DNA, and your fingerprints. Myers bowed his head, lips pressed tight. I touched it when he handed it to me. I didn't kill them. I just helped him push the car into the lake. Do you realize you just admitted to aiding a homicide? Kramer said softly. Maybe I deserve that charge. Myers replied, voice weary. But Halverson's the one who killed them. At the same time, Rebecca opened her laptop, displaying GPS data from Myers' old patrol car, retrieved from 2009 records. The data was undeniable. On December 18th, the patrol car left the station, its signal heading toward Gull Lake's marina, stopping near Halverson's shop at 11:08, then losing signal for 2 hours. When satellite data was recovered, it matched GPS coordinates from photos on Halverson's hard drive, the exact spot where the Explorer was found 4 years later. Rebecca leaned toward Halverson, voice low. Myers' patrol car GPS shows it went to your shop that night. If it was an accident, why didn't you call an ambulance? Why drag all 3 into a car and sink it in the lake? Halverson stared at the table. I was scared. I had a minor assault conviction from I thought no one would believe me. And Myers? He said he'd handle it. I was stupid to trust him. Rebecca paused the recorder briefly, stepped out, and crossed the short hallway connecting the interrogation rooms. Kramer was still talking to Myers. When she entered, he looked up, exhausted. Halverson says you pushed the car into the lake. Rebecca said bluntly. Myers gave a bitter laugh. Of course he did. He knows I was a cop. If it comes to it, everyone believe him over me. But your DNA was in the shop, your boot prints right where the knife was left, because I got there after. I cleaned the scene. I didn't kill them. Did you turn on the patrol cars on Star? No. I forgot. Rebecca slid the file forward. The GPS says otherwise. The air in the room grew thick. Two men, a mechanic and a former deputy, pointing fingers at each other, yet amid their denials, they admitted the same thing. There was a fight, there was blood, and a shared decision led to 3 innocent deaths. By late afternoon, as both men fell silent, Rebecca shut off the recorder and sighed. You can argue forever about who pushed the car, but the truth is, you both stood there, and when that explorer sank through the ice, neither of you stopped it. That evening, Mark Halverson and Rick Myers were taken to Ramsey County Detention Center to await their preliminary hearing. The booking report read, Suspect Halverson and Myers, homicide and obstruction of justice. Statements conflict, but both admit involvement in incident, resulting in death. As the cell doors slammed shut, Rebecca stood in the hallway, watching the red glow of lights reflect on the frosted glass. After nearly a decade, the Gull Lake case finally had 2 names in the primary suspect frame. But for her, it didn't feel like victory. She knew she still didn't have the full story, only that the incident they spoke of was never just an accident. It was a deliberate choice, hidden by duct tape, boat paint, and a silent, ice-covered lake that winter. On the morning of June 12, 2023, the Baxter sky was unusually clear, summer sunlight glinting off the wet pavement after a night of rain. In the parking lot outside Baxter Ice Arena, kids skating early laughed loudly, oblivious to the black SUV parked at the far edge, carrying a BCA and Crow Wing County Police Task Force. Sergeant Rebecca Muir, now lead investigator, gripped her radio, eyes fixed on the arena's large metal door. On the front seat was a signed arrest warrant, bold text reading, Warrant for arrest, Mark Edward Halverson. Charges, second-degree murder, X3, conspiracy to commit homicide and obstruction of justice. Inside the arena, Halverson, 54, hair now heavily gray, was chatting with a group of air conditioner installers. He'd retired from boat repair after the shop fire, living quietly, unnoticed in the county. When Rebecca signaled, 4 officers moved in sync. One spoke, Mark Halverson, you're under arrest for second-degree murder in the 2009 Gull Lake case. You have the right to remain silent. Halverson turned, briefly stunned, his eyes flashing surprise before returning to cold calm. You really think you can prove it? He asked, voice raspy. No one answered. The number 8 cuffs clicked shut, cold steel glinting on his wrists. The kids in the rink stopped playing, watching silently. A woman whispered, That's Halverson, from the shop that burned, right? Word spread like wildfire. Simultaneously, 20 miles away in Pequot Lakes, Rick Myers was at his small log cabin nestled among pines. When the state police arrived, he was on the porch in an old shirt, a coffee mug and morning paper on the table. Seeing the patrol cars, Myers sighed, set the paper down and said softly, Guess today's the day. He didn't resist, only asking if he could bring his heart medication. The 2 arrests happened within an hour, almost simultaneous, as if Rebecca wanted to end nearly 14 years of pursuit with one decisive stroke. As Halverson was loaded into a car, the local press received the BCA's official statement. After years of investigation, forensic breakthroughs, and new witness testimony, Mark Halverson and former Deputy Rick Myers have been arrested in connection with the 2009 Gull Lake triple homicide. Within 3 hours, headlines blazed across Minnesota news. Former deputy tied to 2009 Gull Lake murders, 2 men arrested after 14 years. Below were an old photo of Myers in his sheriff's uniform, and one of Halverson being arrested that morning. Local TV replayed footage of him being led from the rink, face stone cold, head slightly bowed, camera lights reflecting off his cuffs. In a temporary interrogation room at the Crow Wing County Detention Center, Halverson sat before a recording camera, no longer smiling. Rebecca sat across, needing no further questions. She placed a copy of the charges on the table. You're charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder. Alan Porter, Nora Duncan, Clay Hammond, 1 count of evidence tampering, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit homicide. All backed by physical evidence, DNA and digital data. Halverson stayed silent. His weathered face showed the years, his calloused hands tightly clasped. After a moment, he said softly, "Muir, you know, if it hadn't snowed that night, I might not have had to do it." Rebecca replied coldly, "If you hadn't killed them, the snow wouldn't have mattered." Myers was questioned separately that day in Minneapolis. He stuck to his old story, that he only cleaned up, didn't kill anyone. But when the prosecutor presented the patrol car's GPS log and a restored audio clip from the hard drive, a man saying, "Hold it tight, hurry up," Myers' shoulders slumped. He only said, "I didn't want them to die." But once it started, no one could stop. The two men, once a mechanic and a deputy, now sat in separate cells at Ramsey County Detention Center, awaiting their first hearing. Outside, the press, TV, and social media exploded. A Minneapolis Star-Tribune reporter wrote, "The Gull Lake case reminds us justice may come late, but it never loses track. A hair, a drop of blood, a photo file, all outlasted time, breaking a 14-year." That afternoon, submitting the final arrest report to the state prosecutor's office, Rebecca paused at the last line, looking out a window where afternoon sun lit a distant lake. The last patches of winter ice had melted, the water shimmering silver, just like that night in 2009, when 3 lives were sunk. She tapped the desk, adding one final sentence below her signature. After 14 years, Gull Lake finally gave them back. As dusk fell, a patrol car escorted Mark Halverson from the station toward Ramsey Jail. Along the road, dark pine rows stood silent, as witnesses. No more snow, no more silence. Everything had come full circle, just as it began, except this time, justice rode with them. 3 weeks after Halverson and Myers' arrests, the Minnesota State Prosecutor's Office requested the BCA submit a comprehensive forensic report, the final document to build the prosecution's case. In a brightly lit meeting room over 4 sleepless nights, Rebecca Muir sat alone before a wall covered in diagrams, photos and red strings, everything scattered over 14 years. DNA samples, paint, fibers, photos, audio, now connected into a complete web, closing the Gull Lake case's evidence chain. The first key was an unidentified male DNA sample on duct tape from the explorer's cabin. Ignored for nearly 8 years in a BCA freezer, it was analyzed in 2018 through forensic genealogy. Next-generation sequencing reconstructed nearly the entire genome, cross-referenced with public ancestry databases. The result flashed on screen with 99.8% probability, DNA tied to the Halverson-Lundgren lineage, matching Mark Edward Halverson, Nisswa boat shop owner. After his arrest, a new DNA sample from him matched perfectly across all 23 loci, an absolute certainty. The forensic report noted, sample from duct tape conclusively identified as originating from Mark Edward Halverson. Probability of random match, 1 in 10. This alone proved Halverson was in the car, directly handling the victims the night they were subdued. As Rebecca compiled Halverson's DNA results, the forensic lab finalized analysis of a second hair sample and boot print from the fire's ash. Mitochondrial DNA from the hair matched Rick Myers, the former deputy on the size 12 boot print in the shop's charred floor matched the Red Wing 404 sole, a standard patrol boot issued to Myers at the time. Ash in the sole's treads contained the same burned concrete material from Halverson Marine, confirming Myers was at the scene post-fire. Alongside the DNA, BCA physicists completed reports on gray-green paint and microfiber samples. Paint from the Explorer's trunk had a 3-layer structure: zinc primer, polyurethane salt shield, and silica anti-corrosion, a proprietary formula used by Halverson Marine for boat hulls. A December 2009 delivery record from a Minneapolis supplier confirmed batch LOT 621B, matching the crime scene sample. The conclusion read, paint fragment recovered from Explorer trunk demonstrates identical chemical signature to Halverson Marine. No other vendor within 2,000-mile radius used this formula. A dark gray microfiber from Halverson's shop matched the weave of 2,000. The two materials, paint and fiber, linking to the same source, proved the victim's car was in the shop or in direct contact with Halverson's tools and work clothes. The physical link between people, vehicle and location was no longer speculation. As physical evidence solidified, the FBI's Minneapolis digital team completed the picture. A hard drive recovered from the fire held 43 photos and 3 videos, all taken between 10:40. Metadata confirmed a Nikon D40, its serial matching a burned camera body from the shop. The first photo showed headlights reflecting on Gull Lake's ice. The next, a window reflection revealing a man's shoulder-neck ratio matching Halverson. The second video captured wind, a car engine, then a man's voice, "Hold it tight, hurry up." A crash followed, then a woman's scream, voice patterns, matching Nora Duncan. This aligned precisely with the Explorer's OnStar signal shutting off at 10:50. When the FBI presented the digital report, Rebecca took few notes. The visual and audio evidence established the exact time of the crime, the people present and the sequence leading to the 3 deaths. For the first time, science did what witnesses couldn't. The full picture emerged. Halverson and Alan Porter argued in the shop over boat repair payment. A fight left Alan injured or dead. Myers arrived, helping Halverson clean up. They used duct tape and zip ties to restrain the other 2 victims, loaded all 3 into the car, drove to the marina and sank it in the lake. They returned days later to erase traces, and Myers, part of the search, deliberately overlooked the area. State Prosecutor Sandra Kellerman, after the final briefing, said, "Each piece of evidence alone could be coincident together. They form an unbreakable chain." She signed off on the forensic report, confirming the case was ready for prosecution. On August 2, 2023, Forensic Comprehensive Report Demo 940, the 460-page document compiled all DNA, physical, digital, and financial analyses. Its opening summary read, "Through multidisciplinary forensic analysis, investigators conclusively linked Mark Edward Halverson and Rick Myers to the 2009 Gull Lake triple homicide. Scientific certainty exceeds 99.9999. As the sealed file went to the prosecutor's office, Rebecca sat alone in the meeting room, light reflecting off evidence bags, a blood-stained Stanley knife, paint chips, fibers, a burned hard drive, and marina photos in snow. On the table, the file's bold title stood out, State of Minnesota via Mark E. Halverson and Rick D. Myers. 14 years of pursuit, hundreds of investigation hours, thousands of evidence pieces, all now a unified, undeniable story. Rebecca spoke softly, almost to herself. "No case stays cold forever. You just wait for science to heat up enough to melt the truth free." In March 2025, the Crow Wing County Court opened a trial that had been awaited for 14 years. Inside courtroom 2, wooden benches were packed with reporters, locals, and relatives of the 3 victims: Alan Porter, Nora Duncan, and Clay Hammond. The air was heavy, filled only with the scratching of the court clerk's pen and the faint clicks of press cameras. On the defendant's bench, Mark Halverson sat silently, his white hair stark, his sunken eyes devoid of emotion. Beside him, Rick Myers, a once trusted deputy sheriff, sat with his head bowed, hands clenched tightly. The trial lasted 6 weeks, becoming the most complex criminal case in the county's history since. Prosecutor Sandra Kellerman led the state of Minnesota, while the defense consisted of 2 seasoned criminal attorneys who focused their attack on the legality of forensic genealogy, the pivotal evidence that had reopened the case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," defense attorney Grant Pierce began, his voice firm, "the government has violated citizens' privacy by using DNA data from commercial genealogy databases, data submitted by people to find relatives not to be convicted. You are witnessing a dangerous precedent." The prosecution countered with Kellerman's calm voice, "There's nothing dangerous here, only the truth. These DNA samples weren't taken from citizens, but from a murder crime scene. And science has no bias, it only speaks what humans try to hide." She presented to the jury with large projected images, genetic charts, statistical probabilities, and a confirmation from Parabon Nanolabs. On the screen, a bold conclusion stood out: match probability. Kellerman paused for a few seconds, speaking slowly. "That means you're more likely to be struck by a meteor than for there to be a mistake here." On the 3rd day, the court heard testimony from a BCA forensic expert. They described the process of sealing evidence, storing it in cold storage, and reanalyzing DNA samples using NGS technology. A paint trace expert presented images of layered materials under an electron microscope, showing how the polyurethane and silica in the paint sample from the car trunk matched the formula used in Halverson Marine's boat hull paint. When Attorney Pierce objected that industrial paint was common in many places, the expert replied curtly, "Not within a 200-mile radius of Gull Lake. We checked all purchase records. Only one facility used that exact formula." By the second week, Rebecca Muir was called as a key witness. She stood at the stand, her voice low but steady. She recounted the entire investigation, from recovering a hard drive and finding dock photos to matching metadata with the timing of an OnStar signal disruption. When the prosecution asked about her emotions upon viewing the first video, Rebecca said simply, 14 years, and just 18 seconds. But I heard enough to know it was the truth. The defense tried to exploit weaknesses. "Muir, are you certain this data wasn't tampered with or altered?" Rebecca responded, "Certain. The hard drive was recovered following standard forensic protocol, verified by FBI Minneapolis. Timestamps can't be faked. And the voice in the video, do you have conclusive proof it's Halverson's?" She looked directly at the attorney. "We have spectrographic analysis, matching his voice on 47 audio characteristics. But what convinced me more," he said, almost the exact same phrase in the interrogation room, "I just told them to hold tight." By the fourth week, the prosecution displayed crime scene photos, blood traces on a Stanley knife, a microfiber thread, and a 3D reconstruction of the Halverson Marine warehouse. The defense countered that the case lacked direct witnesses and that both defendants claimed it was an accident. But Kellerman concluded firmly, "An accident doesn't require zip ties, duct tape, and sinking a car into a lake in the middle of the night. An accident doesn't involve a co-conspirator receiving a wire transfer 10 days later." In the fifth week, Myers' defense attorney tried to shift blame. "Mr. Myers didn't cause their deaths. He acted foolishly afterward, out of fear. He was a victim of manipulation." But when the prosecution showed GPS data from Myers' old patrol car, indicating it left the station at 10:54 p.m. and stopped at the dock at 11:08 p.m., precisely when the victims disappeared, the defense weakened. A murmur spread through the courtroom. In the final week, the jury heard closing arguments from both sides. Kellerman stepped forward, holding no notes, only an old photo of the explorer being pulled from the lake. "For 14 years Gull Lake kept silent, but science doesn't stay quiet, DNA doesn't lie, and justice doesn't tire." She looked directly at the 12 jurors. "You don't need to believe me. Believe the numbers." After 6 weeks of deliberation, the court moved to verdict discussions. The 12 jurors took less than 8 hours to reach a conclusion. When they returned to the courtroom the next morning, Rebecca sat in the prosecution's row, her hands gripping the case file. The jury foreman stood, voice clear. "In the case of State of Minnesota versus Mark Edward Halverson and Rick David Myers, we the jury find the defendants guilty on all counts." The room fell utterly silent. Halverson showed no reaction, only tilting his head slightly, his eyes vacant. Myers lowered his face, lips trembling, then slumped onto the table. In the front row, Alan Porter's brother broke into tears. Outside the courthouse, news channels broadcast the breaking headline: "Jury finds both men guilty in 2009 Gull Lake murders. Justice delivered after 14 years." As the trial ended, Rebecca stepped into the hallway, where early spring sunlight streamed through tall glass windows. She looked down at the closed case file, where the final line of the forensic report stood out in bold. "Scientific certainty exceeds 99. For the first time in 14 years, that number had the final word. Mark Edward Halverson and Rick David Myers took place at the Crow Wing County Courthouse, in the old wooden courtroom that had become a symbol of justice delayed but never lost. Outside, people gathered under a Justice for Gull Lake banner, holding candles and raising photos of the 3 victims: Alan Porter, Nora Duncan, and Clay Hammond. The atmosphere was both quiet and heavy with anticipation. Inside, morning light filtered through frosted glass windows, casting dappled patterns on the floor. In the front row, Rebecca Muir sat with the BCA investigative team. They had spent nearly 15 years pursuing this case, and now, only a few final words remained to close that journey. On the bench, Judge Harold L. Fenwick, known for his stern demeanor, entered. He carried a thick case file but held only a few sheets of paper. Defendant Mark Halverson was brought in first. Gone was the defiance he showed when arrested at Baxter Ice Arena. His orange jumpsuit was wrinkled, his white hair stark, his eyes dull, staring at the floor. Rick Myers followed, hands trembling slightly, his heavy frame that of a man exhausted. They sat side by side but never looked at each other. The judge began, his voice slow, clear, and deep. After 6 weeks of trial, based on the unanimous verdict of the jury, this court finds both defendants guilty of 3 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, and 1 count of concealing evidence. He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom, then continued. Before sentencing, the court will allow statements from both sides. Prosecutor Sandra Kellerman stood first. Her voice was calm but resolute. 14 years ago, Gull Lake was silenced. But science gave it back its voice. 14 years ago, 3 people were brutally taken, then sunk beneath the ice, as if the truth could be buried too. Today we don't just punish murderers, we restore justice. When it was his turn, Halverson stood, hands cuffed in front of him. He spoke in a low, hoarse voice. I didn't mean to kill them, I just wanted to scare Alan a little, and things got out of hand. I regret it, but none of you know how I've lived these past 10 years. He turned to Rebecca, his gaze heavy. You know, if it hadn't snowed that night, I might have had a chance to make it right. Rebecca didn't respond. In her mind she only heard Mercer's old words. Killers always blame the weather. When asked if he had anything to say, Myers bowed his head for a long time before speaking. I was a cop, I know I betrayed the badge I wore. I don't deny it, I helped him cover it up because I was weak. Scared of losing my job, my honor, and then I lost everything. He looked up at the judge. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just that their families know I've lived in a nightmare for 14 years. The courtroom was so silent you could hear the clerk's pen tapping lightly on paper. Judge Fenwick placed both hands on the bench, his voice slow and firm. Mr. Halverson, you were the origin of this crime. You not only took 3 lives, you stole 14 years of justice. You sank them into the lake, but the lake couldn't swallow your guilt. Mr. Myers, you swore to uphold the law but used your knowledge to conceal a crime. Your betrayal delayed justice for nearly 2 decades. He stood, holding the official sentencing document. Mark Edward Halverson, for the crimes of second-degree murder, conspiracy and concealing evidence. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole. Rick David Myers, for the crimes of complicity and obstruction of justice. This court sentences you to 40 years in prison, with no parole eligibility, for the first 25 years. Both defendants are ordered to cover all investigation costs, and the victim's burial expenses. The judge paused, then delivered his final words, later quoted across news outlets. The ice preserved the truth, not your innocence. The statement echoed, silencing the room. No one clapped, no one cheered, just a profound stillness, as if the entire courtroom bowed to the souls that had rested beneath the lake for 14 years. Halverson closed his eyes briefly. Myers slumped forward. The 2 were handcuffed and led out in silence. The metal door closed with a dry clank, the final sound of the longest case in BCA investigative history. As the judge left the bench, Rebecca remained seated. She looked at the row where the victims' families sat. An elderly woman clutched her daughter's framed photo, tears streaming down her cheeks. Alan's brother nodded toward her, saying nothing. In that moment Rebecca felt more exhausted than ever, but also relieved. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded, camera flashes firing relentlessly. Headlines quickly appeared on local TV screens. Gull Lake murders, life sentence, and 40 years, justice finally served. A reporter asked Rebecca, "Do you think justice has been served?" She replied briefly, "Justice doesn't close, it just stops being delayed." That night, at BCA headquarters, Rebecca and the investigative team signed the final report, officially closing the Gull Lake case file. On the file's cover was a note, Case 09421 closed after 15 years of investigation. She placed her hand on the cover, feeling the thick paper cold as metal. In her mind she saw Gull Lake at dawn, its calm surface, sunlight glinting like a giant mirror. In a corner of the office, Mercer's old photo remained, the first investigator on the case, who once told her, "If you can't find the killer, find why they were killed." Now both questions had answers. Rebecca turned off the light, looking through the glass window at the May Minnesota sky. Gull Lake lay quiet under a faint moon, no longer a place hiding crimes but a reminder. The truth never vanishes. It only waits for the ice to melt, to rise to the surface. The Gull Lake case, officially closed after 15 years. But for those who lived it, this justice wasn't an endpoint, it was the final breath of souls waiting to be heard. April 2026. Minnesota entered an early spring. The sky pale gray like the surface of Gull Lake, where the last ice was melted. Shattered ice patches gleamed silver, drifting slowly on the calm water. No more sounds of salvage cranes, no more police tape or flashing lights, only a gentle breeze, the sound of water lapping against boats, and the damp wood smell of the old dock where it all began. On the south shore, a small BCA group gathered for a final briefing. They brought cameras, files, and a slim document, the Gull Lake Case Summary. On its first page, a bold line read, Case 09421. Solved. 15 winters later, the truth surfaced. Rebecca Muir, now a lieutenant overseeing the cold case division, stood by the lake's edge. Her black coat fluttered slightly in the wind. Beside her was the new sheriff, Evan Rasmussen, who had just signed the case's final line, officially closing one of the longest investigations in state history. He nodded, handing her a copy of the red-stamped document. Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office certifies Case 09421, Gull Lake homicide solved. Rebecca read it slowly, as if each word echoed from 15 years ago. 15 years since that snowy night, since the green explorer vanished under the ice, and 3 people fell silent with their secrets. 15 years of searching, questioning, testing, and finally, this spring, the lake had given everything. In the distance, the lake reflected a cloudy sky, where the disappearance site now held only gentle ripples. She recalled Judge Fenwick's words at sentencing. The ice preserved the truth, not your innocence. At the time, Rebecca thought it was just a closing line for the verdict. But now, standing before this lake, she understood it was also the truth of her profession. Ice could preserve both guilt and justice. The difference was, who had the patience to wait for it to melt. She opened the old notebook Mercer left behind before retiring years ago. On the last page, in blue ink, was his handwritten note. If you can't find the killer, find why they were killed. Rebecca smiled, closing the notebook. She hadn't just found the killer, she'd found the why, how people hide fear, and how time never forgets what's buried. That morning, the BCA held a small memorial by the lake. 3 bouquets were placed on the water, drifting gently away, leaving a faint scent amid the melting ice. No speeches, no media lenses, just a moment of silence, a soft breeze, and the lake's mirror-like surface. A young officer raised a camera to capture the scene: melting ice, flowing water, pale sunlight piercing thin fog. It would be the final image in the case file video, ending with the text, closed, May 20. In memory of those who waited for spring. Sheriff Rasmussen stepped closer, speaking softly to Rebecca. I heard you're taking leave. She nodded. After 15 years, I think this lake needs some quiet. So do I. Will you be back? Rebecca smiled faintly. Maybe. When there's another case that needs the ice to melt. They both looked out at the lake. The last ice patches broke apart, sinking like the quiet breath of an old winter. In that moment, Rebecca thought of Alan, Nora, and Clay, not as victims in a file, but as people finally returned to their true name. She imagined them out there, in the calm water, no longer cold, no longer afraid. As dusk fell, the BCA team packed up, leaving a small wooden sign on the shore, Gull Lake Memorial Point, dedicated to the victims of 2000. As the others left, Rebecca lingered. She stepped to the water's edge, looking down at the lake's mirror-like surface. Beneath, the last ice fragments reflected sunlight, shimmering like thousands of dissolving glass shards. She picked up a small piece, cold in her hand, then let it go. It sank slowly, melting as it touched the water. She turned, walking along the lake's path, where trees were budding. Minnesota's sky glowed amber with sunset. In her ears, no more screams, no more engines, just the steady lapping of water against the shore. For the first time in 15 years, Gull Lake was truly quiet. Before leaving, she glanced back at the lake one last time. The fading sunlight reflected soft ripples. She whispered, to no one in particular, justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from the moment the truth rises to the surface. The breeze carried spring's warmth. The lake lay calm, as if it had never known snow, blood, or silence. Only water, light, and the whisper of souls, finally named, remain. The Gull Lake case, Case 09421, officially closed after 15 years, and as the ice melted away, only one thing endured: the truth. The Gull Lake story isn't just a case solved after 15 winters, it's a roadmap for how we live safely and responsibly in America today. First, technology leaves traces: metadata from a Nikon D40, an OnStar signal cut at 10:57 p.m., dock photos, and the audio "hold tight, hurry up" broke the silence criminals thought was permanent. Practical lesson: enable safety features, find my OnStar real-time location sharing, log travel plans, and preserve dashcam data. When someone goes missing in harsh conditions, like Minnesota, the first few minutes with digital evidence can save lives. Second, science needs time and social consent. Forensic genealogy, 99.8% match to Mark Halverson, is powerful, but requires privacy awareness. Before uploading DNA to genealogy platforms, read their law enforcement sharing policies, discuss with family, and weigh community benefits for cold cases. Third, public integrity isn't a given. Former Deputy Rick Myers is a reminder to support transparency, attend city-county meetings, demand reports on force usage and evidence chain of custody, and know how to file FOIA open records requests. Fourth, communities are justice's external memory. LOT 61B paint, a bloodied Stanley knife, and microfiber threads only gain value through someone like Rebecca Muir, connecting them. So if you see something odd, a silver pickup with no plates, unusual dock activity, report it early, noting time and place. Finally, don't blame victims. Instead, support victim funds, provide meals, or offer childcare, small acts that help families endure until the ice melts. Justice doesn't come quickly, but as the judge said, ice only preserves the truth. Our job is to ensure the truth has a way back. Thank you for joining us through the Gull Lake case, where the truth finally surfaced after 15 winters. Subscribe to our channel to not miss the next stories where justice, though late, always finds its way back.